presumptively risky people. And, you know, from the brief description of this defendant, he does sound like probably he is a presumptively risky person. The court analogized this to other kinds of cases, such as criminals, juveniles without the consent of their parents or guardians, narcotic addicts, mental defectives, armed groups who would supplant duly constituted public authority, and others whose possession of firearms is similarly contrary to the public interest. He said that this person, this regular user of drugs, marijuana, fits in that category of a presumptively risky person. And he said it's analogous to a disarmament felon. Well, kind of anticipating some of the areas. Well, just because the guy smokes a little bit of pot doesn't mean he's necessarily a dangerous person. Well, that's why they analogized it to the cases of felons. Because a felon can't possess a firearm, and it doesn't matter whether you are a dangerous felon, a violent felon, or some kind of white-collar felon. In fact, I like the title of one of the law review articles that they cited as part of this, and that was, "Why Can't Martha Stewart Have a Gun?" You know, Martha Stewart, she lied to the FBI about some insider trading. You know, she's probably not going to go out on a shooting rampage or anything like that, but she is not allowed to have a gun. And, you know, you have to draw the line somewhere. And Congress chose to draw the line at if you're a felon, not necessarily a violent felon or anything like that, but simply if you're a felon, you can't possess a firearm. And here too, the line has to be drawn somewhere. So here, this regular user of marijuana, he is within the line that's not allowed to possess firearms, and he can't argue that in his particular case it shouldn't apply, something like that. Therefore, the government did indeed make this strong showing that it was related to the government objective. Interesting to note, the court said, well, this guy is really better off than the felon or somebody who's been committed to a mental institution. Because if you're a felon, there's nothing that you can do to get back your right to possess firearms. You know, that's external to you. You know, but here, the unlawful drug user can regain his right to possess a firearm simply by ending his drug abuse. So here, this poor Mr. Yancey, instead of when he was picked up and said, "Yeah, that's my pot, I smoke it every day," it would have been a different case if he would have said, "Oh yeah, that was my pot, I used to smoke it every day, but I stopped this morning." Then it would be a different case, presumably, because he's no longer a user of illegal drugs. But that's not what he said, and I guess probably actually having it in your pocket probably didn't help his case too much. But if he had given it up the day before, then presumably he would not have been convicted. But he was. This case does raise a couple of interesting things. Because as you see, it's a case of possession of a firearm. Again, this particular guy is not particularly sympathetic. But it does show, I think, that a lot of these firearms do contain a lot of pitfalls and traps for the unwary, and they're difficult to navigate sometimes. And here again, the guy jumps immediately to his constitutional defense, and you know that's all he's resting his case on, is that no, under the Constitution I'm entitled to possess a gun. Well, in his case, like I said, it's not particularly compelling, but if somebody comes in to your office and says, you know, I was convicted 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or, you know, I was in some trouble way back then, and, you know, I like going hunting. Can I still go hunting because of that thing that happened 20 years ago? And I'm very uncomfortable answering those kinds of questions because there are so many traps for the unwary. Because in some circumstances, in some cases, somebody will, and in some states, because it'll vary, because whether or not you are a felon for purposes of federal law is determined by state law. So you have to look at the state of the underlying conviction. And some of those questions get very murky of, are you still a felon? You know, because some states seem to have almost once a felon, always a felon. If you're convicted of a felony when you're 19 years old, you're still a felon when you're